Gracious God, you know our past faults and failures because you are always with us. By the power of your Spirit, transform our heartache into acts of mercy and justice for your children today and every day. Sustain us with your presence and remind us of your salvation offered through Christ. Amen. Okay, we left off last week. The music had just started in Old Fezziwig's. This is on the first, number 1. I think it needs to be turned up a little. Ooh, be careful. You okay? Okay, so that's where we left off in our story, so I'm going to start there right now. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one, who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest, upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home, exhausted on a shutter, and he was a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them. And so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to be able to say a word or 2 to my clerk just now. That's all." This is our second sign of redemption, as he is beginning to recall that money is not the source of happiness. That is what he is learning here. Like the caroler, he now remembers Cratchit. Christmas involves all of the senses: sight, sounds, taste, touch, smell. So how are all of these involved in your Christmas?
I spray the Christmas tree with evergreen scent.
Did you hear that? Mm-hmm. Okay, they heard it good.
I did. I don't think Ted did, but I did.
I play a lot of Christmas music for sound.
Looking at, as I said last week, my nativity sets and feeling them and thinking about the true meaning of Christmas. And also, I started baking my cookies yesterday with the grandchildren, and the smell was wonderful.
And the smell of candles. I used to use candles quite a bit throughout the year, but now it's reserved primarily just for Christmas, for safety reasons.
So, how many of us used to dance on Christmas? Lost from Christmas celebrations.
Non-dancing family.
Non-dancing family. Well, I think, one of the things that, as I've been working through this, is just noticing how much of our traditions have changed in the sense of what actually happens. But the other reality is we're still involving all of our senses in different ways, but we're still involving our senses in the feelings of Christmas. So sometimes we have to remember how we felt by things that made us happy, as Scrooge did, for us to understand sometimes, you know, it goes back to the golden rule. Treat people like you want to be treated. Or, to even rephrase it in the aspect of this story, treat people as you have been treated by those who gave you happiness.
But you have to be careful with that in the giving. Henry Nouwen just had a good one on that.
Closer to your mouth, Sharon.
Henry Nouwen just had a good devotion on that. Is our giving from the heart, or is our giving because we want to do better, or we want to have that person acknowledge us? So what is the purpose of the giving? And it's kind of tricky sometimes. You're on a fine line.
Well, I think I meant it in the way of he was made happy by this boss, and so he should be behaving the same way when he is a boss.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, moving on in our story. His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid approach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion gain engrosses you. Have I not?" She makes the comment that he fears the world too much. And it's interesting with the response, because he says the world is hard on poverty, and at the same time it condemns the pursuit of wealth. And if you recall that very first Sunday in Advent, we talked about the opposite of peace is fear. Peace comes when there is no fear. So, I don't know if anybody really wants to share on this, but the question was, how has fear infiltrated your Advent season this year?
Fear of COVID.
Richard said fear of COVID. Fear has. Is it on now? Well, I can hear it clicking. It's up, all the way up, and it'll be on, but it also has to be close to your mouth.
Fear has not entered my life this holiday season at all. I will not allow it.
Did you hear that? You're shaking your head, Doris. She said fear hasn't entered her Advent season because she is keeping it at bay.
I don't know that it's fear as much as it is sadness. Especially with last couple of days of all the prayer requests that we have had, that it's not the fear as it is sadness for what people are going through.
And I think it is sad that we've had to change so many of our traditions and what we normally do and who we can have over and all of the other impacts on our comfort level. Can't help but think that God's trying to take us outside of our comfort level. We like our status quo.
I think it's interesting too how the contrast of poverty and money. And they go hand in hand, irregardless of what end of the spectrum you are. You can have money, but still have poverty. You can have poverty and have a little bit of money or no money. But what is that poverty? Is it poverty of the spirit? And how is it that we are using the monies that we have?
Can you guys hear that? She's still got it about 1.5 inches away from her mouth.
I have it touching I started to say my beard.
Your bib. Well, that I could hear though.
Okay.
Can you guys hear it? Rich?
Poverty and money are the two things that they were contrasting there, and I was saying that you can have money and still have poverty. You can have poverty and no money, or poverty with money. But I think the question is, what is the poverty that we have? Is it a spiritual poverty?
Did you hear that one? Okay, if nobody has anything else to say, we'll move on to the next one. What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feelings tells you that you are not what you are, she returned. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this. I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Ah, no. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself. But he said with a struggle, you think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could. She answered, heaven knows. When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You, who in your very confidence with her weigh everything by gain? Or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so? Do I not now know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain with this. In very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it, gladly, as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. We often dismiss unhappy memories, especially when we are the ones who made the unhappiness happen, or we will rewrite them in our memories. Reliving the memory eventually moves Scrooge to compassion towards those who know the pain of brokenness. How might God be calling you, or you can share sometime, that a painful memory actually came into your mind and you were able to provide blessings for you and for others because of that memory? That's deep thinking here, but we are online.
Well, I'm not going to give the specific memories, but one of the
Closer.
I've got it into the mask.
There we go.
One of the things that I have found when I've been doing the Bible study group is that sometimes the bad memories are good lessons to share with others. And so sharing that memory can help another person to grow, which is what she indicates there. But you can't let that memory eat you up. You have let it grow so that it's a positive to others.
Doris said that's true.
It's a release to share it. It's a release for the mind.
Did you hear that? She said it's a release to be able to share it. I don't know how to get this louder.
You don't have a little indicator at the bottom of your screen to make your speaker loud?
Yes, I have it on 100%.
Okay.
Oh, I know what I can do. I can bring one of those little earbuds, I bet, to make this better sometime. I don't have any with me though. I'll just have to repeat it with you guys. Paul even says that much of our suffering God allows so that we can help others who are suffering. So even if it's not our own fault for what happened, we can still use our suffering for the good of others. What do you think Scrooge thought of that scene? I mean, I've seen it played many different ways. It's interesting because one of the movies has Fezziwig, when he talks about his wife, says, you gotta go through life with a great woman by your side. And apparently Scrooge forgot that advice. And another, what?
I think it had a big impact on him because he had had that conversation with his nephew earlier about his disdain for the fact that he got married. And so I think that kind of touched him because he realized something that he had lost.
Did you hear that? Good. And Doris agreed. Go ahead, Dr. Joe.
I liked her comment when she said that she hoped that he had happiness in whatever life he chose for himself. That's pretty magnanimous of someone to say that when your heart is breaking.
Okay, we are almost done with this chapter. She left him and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Next, near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count. And unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much. And the latter, soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them? Though I never could have been so rude. No. I would for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe, I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have had the lightest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she was, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it, the center of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders to dive into his pockets, despoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pummel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this a false alarm, the joy and gratitude and ecstasy. They are all indescribably alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And when he thought with such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" "Guess." "How can I? Don't I know?" She added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge." Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat, quite alone in the world, I do believe. "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." "I told you these were shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "That they are what they are, do not blame me." "Remove me," Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. "Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer." In the struggle, as if that could be called a struggle in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon his head. The spirit dropped beneath it so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. So here we are at the end of The Ghost of Christmas Past. What can you learn from this example of God's redemption work?
Was waiting for the others to say something first. But Scrooge is seeing what he has done, and he is very uncomfortable with it. I don't want to deal with what I saw. I am different now, even though we haven't seen the change, but he is indicating the change is coming about because he's not comfortable seeing the joyousness of all the kids and seeing everything that's been happening. He wanted to be a recluse. Get me out of here. but yet he has a little inkling that's not what I am anymore.
I think it's kind of interesting also that it kind of shows us that if we don't find redemption, the world goes on without us and experiences very good things.
Did you hear that?
No, you need to repeat that one.
I need to repeat that one. He was saying it shows us that if we don't seek redemption, that the world will go on without us, and we're the ones that are losing. Am I saying it correctly, Richard?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's really significant that Scripture says men love darkness rather than light. And, and the fact that he's trying to put out the light, the cap, the white light that's coming, and he puts the cap back on the ghost of the Christmas past, trying to drown out the light. And I think there's some real analogies in that.
Well, when you are being redeemed and redemption is taking place, there's a certain vulnerability and unknown. I don't want to use the word fear, but that's kind of the cliche, is fear of the unknown. And I think that's what happens in redemption, is that people have an uneasy feeling about, okay, what am I doing? What does this mean? And become very vulnerable.
So what do we learn from reflecting on the past?
We can see where we came from, and therefore see that redemption is good.
I think we can learn many things from what we did in the past so that we don't repeat it, make the same mistakes. It's a good lesson.
You have me, or you don't have Rhoda either. I have you, but I don't have Rhoda.
I lost everybody.
You hear me?
I can hear you, but you're all very still.
The problem is on Rhoda's end, church.
What?
That's all really is.
I see you.
Probably, he said I'm the problem.
There you are. Yeah, she's not moving.
Okay, so Deborah, now Richard's gone. So Deborah Jo was sharing that we learn many things from reflecting on our past. And I think what's really important is we don't even know to ask for forgiveness if we haven't reflected on our past. If we are always moving forward in the forward direction. Doris, you have your mic off, according to my screen. What's that?
She may have accidentally shut off her speaker too then.
Yeah. Well, now she's gone.
Was there a
I've lost them both.
Was there a time limit on that?
No. Okay, I can hear Doris. Okay. And Richard came back as well. He's somewhere in the mountains. He's got a background of mountains on my picture. You've lost us both? Doris says she's lost us both, but I can hear her. You know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing what I've said. So I'm going to be repeating back to myself. Oh, Richard's now got fireworks going on.
He's changing his
Where?
Behind you.
Oh, is that what that noise is?
Okay. We are going to start the next chapter. Thank you. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore. I'm going to have to shut them off because this is,
Not seeing you. Well, now I see. But I don't see Doris there. Okay, I've muted them because I'm getting feedback for some reason. We may have to leave that meeting and come back, or they may have to go to Facebook. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the special purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But, finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new specter would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again established a sharp lookout all around the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposites, extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always a person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too, at last, I say. He began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock,
A strange voice called him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, but there was no doubt about that. It had undergone a surprising transformation. And now I have nobody in my room. So, they have left me. Maybe they have gone to Facebook and given up. The problem is that internet is so far from here and we're using 2 internet functions, so it may not be able to handle it. All right. We have talked about, and perhaps I need to read the description of this room first, because that isn't. The walls and ceiling were so hung with green, living green, that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light. If so many little mirrors had been scattered here, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone, heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, prawns, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. So now we're in a room that's greatly decorated and is enjoying Christmas as we enjoy Christmas. And it should remind us of God's abundance that He gives us. But abundance can get out of hand, and we can confuse in times of abundance our own wants with our own needs. And that becomes confusing. The present is now, and now is where everything is happening. And the minute you start to think about what is happening, it becomes the past. So, let's just talk about God's abundance and how we see this mostly at Christmas and how it can get out of hand. I will look for anyone's input into those thoughts. Any of those thoughts.
I think when you talk about get out of hand, it's very troublesome sometimes when you hear people talk about how much debt they went into during the Christmas season. January comes around and they're very frustrated, very upset, and stressed because they spent too much money. And so I think that it's important that we limit ourselves, have a budget, and take control. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. But we are very blessed, almost everybody in this country, because we do have abundance. If you think about other countries where they have, they have no running water, they have no indoor facilities. We take so much for granted here, and we do have an abundance, and we're very blessed that God has given us all the many things that we have. Most importantly, our families.
definitely agree that debt in this country is, especially over this season, but it's not just this season. There are many people who do not know how to manage their own money. But you're mentioning running water, and I'm reminded, my sister Becky just said I lost my internet connection. My sister Becky served at a mission hospital in Africa. Well, she did, but her husband did, and she went with him. But the point was, he worked in the lab at the hospital, and his running water was a jug of water that was over the sink that he tipped down. That was his running water, and it would have to be refilled. And, we just turn on the faucet. And even in countries, when we went to Israel, they were reminding us that they had just come through the dry season, so the water was low, so don't run the water while you're brushing your teeth. Turn it off. Things like that. And we just take our running water for granted.
When you live in California, you learn how to live on 5 gallons a day in the summer months. But we have a lot of places here in the United States even where water has to be hauled in 50 miles or more to a person's home. We do take advantage of a lot of things. We don't really realize how much we really have. It's amazing when you stop to think about it. And sometimes we don't pay attention to some of that. It's like when you ask a child, where does milk come from? And they say, from this grocery store, not realizing it came from a cow. And I think that's kind of some of our own perceptions of various things in life. What is truly happening and that we have personally as an abundance.
Anyone else?
I was picturing the room when you were describing it. And it almost reminded me of a big garden room with all of the festivities and all of the tables set up with tons of food. And everybody being happy. Going back to this 40 children that were 40 children each in their activity. And I think that's how we get sometimes. We are so excited. And when we start sharing God's love with others, we have that kind of excitement that other people a lot of times can't handle. They can't handle that joy that you have.
Well, the next pause they want us to take is right at the next sentence, which is, "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." The idea is that we will always, however small, only be able to tell it like we see it. No matter what. We always say, tell it like it is. Well, none of us can do that. We tell it like we see it through our years of experience and our years of perceptions. And sometimes we just need to see things from a different angle, a different way, a different perspective. And getting to know God, part of that is the spirit of Christmas with what God has done. As we're looking at that and we begin to think, we can get awfully caught up in thinking there's a war on Christmas instead of showing the spirit of Christmas and not showing the irritation. So how is it that we can keep our Christ-like Christmas spirit throughout the season without involving in ourselves in what's called the Christmas wars? Because somebody said Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or those are the spirit wars that people often feel like they're fighting here. And we really need to be, as His people, showing the spirit of Christmas, not fighting a war. So how do we keep that spirit of Christmas? I can't hear you, Richard. What did you say? Well, that's not helpful, because I don't know why I can't hear
Eat more Christmas cookies.
you. He said, eat more Christmas cookies. We'll have the spirit of Christmas. I don't know if you could hear it, but you gotta laugh. 2 laughs.
Tough crowd.
I think one of the phrases that has been going throughout this pandemic, which has been kind of a neat one, is be kind. Irregardless of what it is that someone else says, be kind. And that's the same with somebody saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or maybe they say Happy Hanukkah. But in that, responding with kindness and, following Jesus' example of love one another. Love, that is the key.
And with Christmas, so many long lines, and because we haven't really experienced that this year so much because of COVID. A lot more online shoppers and delivery, so you didn't have to go to the stores and fight the long lines in the parking, like one has had to do in the past, which has been, I don't know, kind of nice. Other ideas of how to keep our Christmas spirit?
Keep our traditions going.
Keep as many of our traditions going as we can, yes. It makes us feel like we've got a little bit of home or some normalcy involved.
Bake more cookies, Deborah. Bake more cookies, Deborah.
Yeah, and will you share? Do you
This
mind
is the
sharing
voice
these?
of Christmas present and future. Bake more cookies.
Okay,
I think she got the message, Sharon.
I'll share.
She'll even share them. How about that? She's got a little bit of share on and on in her. Okay. We'll go on in our story. Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. I am the ghost of Christmas present, said the spirit. Look upon me. Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family?" Meaning, for I am very young. "My elder brothers born in these later years?" pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit from it." We are now looking at another sign of redemption. In Scrooge, he is asking to be taught. He still hasn't given up his old ways of thinking, because what did he say about the family? Tremendous family to provide for, right away thinking money. So that came up in the conversation. How is a willingness to be taught a sign of redemption? Well, you're just traveling all over the world here, Richard.
May I speak?
Yes.
I think it's a clear indication that what you've been doing is wrong and you need guidance. When you ask to be taught something, that means you don't know what you're doing. And you need some direction.
Notice he also uses the word profit. He says, "Let me profit by it." And what was Bell saying before? That he weighs everything by gain, and now he's using the word very differently.
And what is it that Jesus says? "Oh, what shall it profit? Riches and pleasures to gain?"
What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and lose his own soul? Okay, I've lost Doris and Richard. So since you've both spoken, except the silent one, we will move on. Okay, I'm just trying to figure out where I start, or end. "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. Holly-toe, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music. In scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their buildings and from tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumping down into the road below and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons. furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, where heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. That's a sentence we're going to stop on because he is drawing for us, the author right now, two stories: joy and pain, frivolity and hardship, abundance and scarcity. He is showing us in the spirit of Christmas there is always a glimmer of hope in a hurting world. How do you see that in our world today?
The last couple of days on the news, they have been sharing things that people are doing, calling them heroes. And it's interesting to see what children are doing to help one another. There's a couple of young girls that are 18 that have started a business where they are working towards serving others with food in need. And they plan to have like an apartment building down the road for people that are homeless. Some of these young kids that are 13, 14 are coming up with ideas to reach out to other people. What a wonderful thing at Christmas time that they are being recognized for the work that they're doing for their communities. I think we see a lot of that if we just look. You know, we focus so much on the negative instead of putting some of the positive in it.
I think some of that is, though, the result, very honestly, of the media. Because the negative media is what gets publicized more often. Even when they cover stories like this, it's like 3 minutes of this and 28 minutes of grief, of all the things that have gone wrong.
Right. But at least that little bit is coming out, and hopefully more of it will come out on a regular basis instead of just at Christmas.
I think that's the message even that we as Christians need to keep putting out there, is that glimmer of hope, because we have the hope of the world, and that is why Christ came. Other thoughts? Our author points out that we often sing our Christmas carols and don't pay really close attention to the words. And he talks about the song, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. And so that's just a wonderful message to bring and share. We're going to read one last section, and then we can talk about whether or not we want to continue after Christmas, because obviously we haven't gotten through the whole story. So, for the people who were shoveling away on the housetop roofs, were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shells in the wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glancing demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, oh, the grocers, nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through these gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so quickly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruit so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress. But the customers were all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humor possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind might have been their own, worn out for general inspection, and for Christmas daws to peck as if they chose. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces, and at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said, it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God loved it, so it was. We live in a culture of fear and distrust. And I'm not just talking about COVID here. I'm talking about we see a stranger and we don't know, can we trust that stranger? But Christ transformed Egypt, this symbol of hate and fear and slavery, into a symbol of hope and resurrection. Because that is where the Christ child found refuge from death. So how can we go about keeping the symbol of hope and restoration in our Christmas?
You want an answer to that?
Yes.
I think one of the most important things we can do, and we need to do it all year round, but especially at Christmas, when we meet people, we really have no idea what problems they may be experiencing. And sometimes people can have well, of course it's hard to tell anymore, a frown on your face, whether they're smiling or not, because of these stupid masks. But at any rate, sometimes you can tell that they're having a bad day. And sometimes all it takes is for you to show love or kindness to them. Because I know that sometimes with me, I'll be experiencing stress or sadness or whatever, and I'll be out somewhere and somebody will come along and just say the nicest thing, compliment me, or you can just tell by their demeanor that they're trying to share love from your heart. And I think it's so important that we try to do that, especially at Christmas time. And of course, really all year round, but especially at Christmas, because to me, heaven came down and glory filled my soul. And that heaven that came down was God, the embodiment of love. And that's what this season is really about. Love. Sharing God's love.
You covered it all, Deborah Jo. Anybody else has anything to add? And that's what we have to remember. That we have, it's the greatest gift that we can give to anyone else, and it doesn't cost us anything. Or at least it doesn't cost us anything out of our pocket. It might cost us our pride and humility and sometimes. But God showed his humility just by coming and being part of his own creation. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's close in prayer. Lord God, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming so that we can all be redeemed. Thank you for this time that we can share in celebration of your coming. And even though not everyone we meet is celebrating that, we can share you with them by simply being kind and loving. Lord, we pray that each child who claims you as their Redeemer desire and wish and hope the same for each and every person. We thank you for the memories that help us understand others. We thank you for the present time that we have to share, that we are here and that we have so much. We pray this in the precious name of Jesus and in the power of God's Holy Spirit. Amen. Good night on Facebook, and God bless.